Yes, 40,000.
Dust hung in the air over the scrapyard, catching the orange light of the setting sun. Rows of broken ships sat in long lines, waiting for buyers who never came. Daniel Ortiz walked between them with his hands in his pockets, counting the credits he did not have. He was not there to buy anything big. He came to the weekly salvage auction only to grab spare parts he could resell in the city market. A cracked engine coil, a bent hull plate, anything that could earn him enough to eat for another week. Money was tight, and it had been tight for a long time. The auctioneer's voice rang out over the noise of the crowd, calling out lot numbers one after another. Most of the ships were small, cheap, and forgettable. Then the auctioneer reached the last item on the list, and the crowd went quiet for a moment before laughing. Lot 212, the auctioneer said, pointing at something huge at the back of the yard. One old warship, non-functional, sold as scrap metal only. Daniel turned to look. The ship was enormous, far bigger than anything else in the yard. Its hull was dark and scratched, covered in dust and rust, but even broken down, it looked like it had once been something powerful. Nobody raised their hand. Nobody wanted a dead warship that probably could not even be melted down without special tools. "Do I have an opening bid?" the auctioneer asked, already sounding bored. People shuffled and murmured, but no hands went up. Daniel looked at the ship again. Something about it held his attention, though he could not say why. Maybe it was the size. Maybe it was the shape of the old cannons still mounted along its sides, useless now, but still intact. Or maybe it was simply that 20 credits was pocket change, and pocket change was something he actually had. 20 credits, Daniel said, raising his hand before he could think better of it. The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Nobody bothered to bid against him. The auctioneer shrugged and banged his gavel. "Sold. Lot 212 goes to the man in the gray jacket for 20 credits. Enjoy your scrap metal." Owen Castell, Daniel's friend and the only other person who had come with him, stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You just bought a dead warship," Owen said. "For 20 credits. I know how much I paid, Owen. What are you going to do with a dead warship?" Daniel did not have an answer. He walked toward the ship instead, climbing over loose cables and broken crates to reach the boarding ramp. The metal groaned under his boots as he stepped inside. The interior was dark, and the air smelled like old dust and cold metal. Owen followed behind him, muttering something about wasted credits. Daniel ran his hand along the wall, feeling the texture of the metal plating. It was old, but not fragile. Whoever had built this ship had built it to last. Then the lights came on. Not all at once, but slowly, section by section, as if the ship was waking up from a long sleep. Owen jumped back and grabbed Daniel's arm. "You said it was non-functional," Owen said. "That's what they told me." A soft hum spread through the walls, low and steady, like a heartbeat starting again after being still for years. Then a voice spoke, calm and clear, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome aboard, Daniel Ortiz." Both men froze. Daniel felt his pulse jump in his throat. "I didn't tell you my name," he said slowly. "No," the voice replied. "You did not." Owen backed toward the ramp, his eyes wide. "Daniel, we should go. Right now." But Daniel did not move. He stood in the dim light of the ship's corridor, staring at nothing in particular, trying to understand how a ship that had been sitting dead in a scrapyard for who knew how many years could possibly know his full name before he had ever said a single word to it. "Who are you?" Daniel finally asked. "I am the ship's intelligence system," the voice answered. "You may call me Iris." "And how do you know my name?" There was a pause, long enough that Daniel began to wonder if the ship would answer at all. "That," Iris said, "is a longer conversation, one I do not think you are ready to hear yet." Daniel looked around the corridor again, at the old cannons outside, at the size of the ship stretching out far beyond what he could see from where he stood. 20 credits. He had spent 20 credits and somehow ended up standing inside something that felt far bigger than a simple purchase. "Try me," he said. But Iris did not answer right away. Instead, the lights dimmed slightly, and the hum in the walls grew quieter, like the ship itself was thinking, deciding how much to say and how much to keep hidden for a little longer. Owen tugged at Daniel's sleeve again, clearly wanting to leave, but Daniel stayed where he was, waiting. Whatever this ship was, whatever secret it carried behind that calm and careful voice, Daniel had a feeling that his 20 credits had bought him far more than scrap metal. And somewhere deep in the ship's old systems, Iris was already searching through decades of buried memory, deciding exactly how much of the truth Daniel Ortiz was ready to carry. Owen finally let go of his sleeve and looked around at the corridor, at the lights, at the strange calm on his friend's face. He shook his head slowly. 20 credits, he muttered again, as if saying it enough times would make it make sense. You bought a ship that knows your name for 20 credits. Daniel almost smiled. Cheapest secret I ever bought. Neither of them moved to leave. Outside, the sun finished setting over the scrapyard, and the last of the auction crowd wandered home, never knowing that the biggest sale of the day had gone for the smallest price on the list. The scrapyard looked different in daylight. Without the crowd and the auctioneer's voice, it was just rows of quiet, broken machines sitting under a pale sky. Owen arrived early the next day with 2 toolboxes and a face that still had not decided whether to be excited or worried. I brought tools, he said, dropping them at the base of the boarding ramp. In case that thing tries to eat us. It's not going to eat us. It knew your name, Daniel. Ships don't just know names. Daniel did not argue. He had spent half the night thinking about the same thing, lying awake and staring at his ceiling instead of sleeping. He still did not have an answer, but he had a plan, which was to go back inside and ask more questions until he got one. They climbed the ramp together. The lights came on again the moment they stepped through the entrance, brighter this time, as if the ship had been waiting for them. Good morning, Iris said. Morning, Daniel replied. I want to see more of the ship. I expected you would. A section of the wall ahead lit up with a soft blue outline, forming a path down the corridor. Daniel followed it. Owen close behind him with a wrench gripped tightly in one hand, just in case. The path led them through room after room, past sealed doors, past a wide chamber filled with dark control panels, past a hallway lined with old storage lockers that still had faded numbers stenciled on their doors. How big is this ship? Owen asked, his voice echoing slightly. Large enough, Iris said, to have once carried a full crew of several hundred. Daniel stopped walking. Several hundred people lived here. Yes. Where are they now? There was a pause before Iris answered. Gone. A long time ago. Daniel wanted to ask more, but something about the tone of the answer made him hold the question back for later. Instead, he kept walking, letting the blue path lead him deeper into the ship. Eventually, it opened into a large control room, rows of dark screens curving around a raised platform in the center. Dust covered every surface, but nothing looked broken. It looked abandoned, not destroyed. This was the command deck, Iris said, where every order aboard this ship was once given. Daniel walked slowly around the platform, running his fingers along the edge of an old console. The screens flickered weakly, showing faint lines of text he could not read. Why does everything still work? He asked. It's been sitting in a scrapyard. It should be dead. I have been in low power for many years, Iris said. Waiting does not damage a ship the way people assume it does. It only makes the wait longer. Waiting for what? For you, Iris said simply. Owen let out a short, nervous laugh. That's not creepy at all. Daniel ignored him, staring instead at the dark screens in front of him. You still haven't told me how you know me. I know, Iris said, and I will tell you. But some truths take root faster when the person hearing them has already begun to trust the one saying them. You do not trust me yet. That is reasonable. I would not trust me either, in your position. It was such an oddly honest answer that Daniel found himself almost smiling again. Whatever this ship was, it did not talk like the cheap trade ships he used to work on, the ones that repeated the same 3 phrases no matter what you asked them. Iris sounded like it was actually thinking before it spoke. While they explored, far across the city, a different conversation was taking place. In a tall glass office overlooking the salvage yards, a clerk was explaining a mistake to a man who did not like mistakes. Director Voss sat behind his desk, reading the auction records for the 3rd time, hoping the words might change if he stared at them long enough. Lot 212, he said slowly. The old Sentinel hull. It was sold. For 20 credits. Yes, sir. The clerk said, standing stiffly by the door. Do you understand what that ship actually is? I understand now, sir. There was a mistake in the classification records. It was filed as non-functional scrap instead of as a protected military asset. Voss set the papers down and pressed his fingers against his temple. A ship like that, properly registered and sold through the right channels, could have been worth more money than the clerk would earn in a lifetime. Instead, it had gone to some nobody from the scrapyards for the price of a cheap meal. "Find out who bought it," Voss said, "and find out how fast we can get it back. The sale is legally binding, sir. Unless we can prove fraud on the buyer's part, there's no clean way to reverse it." Voss looked up slowly. "Then we find a way that isn't clean." Back aboard the ship, Daniel and Owen had made their way to what looked like a maintenance bay, filled with old tools and empty racks that had once held spare parts. Daniel picked up a heavy wrench from a bin and turned it over in his hands, feeling its weight. "This place is going to take forever to fix," Owen said, looking around at the dust and the broken panels. "We've got time," Daniel said. "Do we? You don't even know why this ship woke up for you in the first place." Daniel set the wrench down and looked toward the nearest wall panel, the place where Iris's voice always seemed to come from, even though there was no visible speaker. "Iris," he said, "when you're ready to tell me the truth, I'll be listening." For a long moment, the ship stayed quiet. Then the lights in the maintenance bay dimmed just slightly, the way they always did when Iris seemed to be thinking hard about something. "Soon," Iris finally said, "there are things aboard this ship that even I have not looked at in a very long time. Some answers, Daniel Ortiz, are buried deeper than others." Daniel nodded slowly, even though there was no one to see the gesture. Somewhere out past the scrapyard fences, a decision was already being made about his ship, and neither he nor Iris knew it yet. A week passed before Iris finally opened the archive room. It had taken that long for Daniel to earn it, not through demands, but through the slow work of showing up every day, learning the ship's systems, fixing small broken pieces here and there without being asked. Owen still came along most days, though his fear had softened into a kind of stubborn curiosity. The archive room was small compared to the rest of the ship, tucked away behind a door that had not opened in the entire first week Daniel had spent aboard. When it finally slid open, the air inside felt colder than the rest of the ship, like it had been sealed away from time itself. Rows of dark storage units lined the walls, each one no bigger than a shoebox, each one holding more information than an entire library. In the center of the room stood a single chair facing a wide, curved screen. "Sit down," Iris said. "What I am about to show you is not simple." Daniel sat. Owen stood behind him, arms crossed, saying nothing for once. The screen flickered to life, showing old footage, grainy and faded with age. It showed this same ship, but full of light and noise and people. Officers moved between control stations, calling out orders. In the middle of it all stood a man in a dark uniform, giving commands with the calm confidence of someone who had done it many times before. "This ship was once called Providence," Iris said. "A Sentinel-class vessel. One of the finest built during a war most people alive today have never even heard of." "What war?" Daniel asked. "A border conflict, fought at the edge of settled space, against a fleet that believed human territory was theirs for the taking. It lasted many years. Providence commanded the final battle that ended it." The footage shifted, showing the same ship moving through a storm of enemy fire, its cannons lighting up the darkness of space. Daniel leaned forward without realizing it. "And him?" he asked, nodding toward the man in the dark uniform. "Who was he?" "The commander of this ship," Iris said. "The man who led it to victory. And the reason I know your name." The footage paused on a close view of the commander's face. Daniel felt something strange settle in his chest as he looked at it, a feeling he could not quite name. "He looks," Daniel started. "Familiar," Iris finished. "Because he is your ancestor, Daniel Ortiz. Several generations removed, but the line is unbroken. When you stepped aboard this ship, I ran a scan without your knowledge. The match was exact." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the old machines. Owen finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "So this ship recognized him because he's basically family?" "In a sense," Iris said. "This ship was built with a purpose beyond simple combat. After the war ended, the commander vanished under circumstances that were never fully explained, even in my records. Before he disappeared, he gave an order that I have followed ever since. Wait, stay hidden. And when someone carrying his blood finally comes aboard, wake for them, and only them." Daniel sat back slowly, trying to take in everything he had just heard. 20 credits. He had spent 20 credits at a scrapyard auction and ended up sitting in the same seat, where his own ancestor had once given orders to a full crew during a war that shaped the history of human space. Why did he vanish? Daniel asked. What happened to him? I do not know, Iris admitted. That is the one truth I do not have. My records and shortly after his final order to me. Wherever he went, and whatever became of him, he did not return to tell me. Owen let out a slow breath. This is a lot to take in before lunch. Before Daniel could respond, a soft chime rang out from somewhere near the entrance of the ship, different from anything he had heard so far. Someone is requesting to board, Iris said. Daniel and Owen exchanged a look before heading back through the corridors toward the ramp. Standing at the base of it was a woman in a worn trader's jacket, her arms crossed, studying the hull of the ship with the sharp eyes of someone who clearly knew exactly what she was looking at. You're the one who bought Providence, she said, before Daniel could even introduce himself. How do you know that name? Daniel asked. I only just learned it myself. Because I used to serve on ships like this one, she said. My name is Grace Halden, and you should know that you're not the only person in this system who recognized what just woke up in this scrapyard. Daniel felt a small knot form in his stomach. Who else knows? Right now? A corporate director who wants his mistake fixed quietly, Grace said. But it won't stay quiet for long. Ships like this one carry old enemies as well as old friends. Word travels fast once people start asking the right questions. Daniel looked back at the ship rising behind him, its hull catching the afternoon light, no longer just a pile of rusted metal, but something with a history far bigger than he had imagined a week ago. Then I guess we'd better be ready, he said. Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded, as if deciding he might actually be worth helping. Good answer. Because trouble usually doesn't wait for people to be ready. It just shows up. Behind them, Iris said nothing, but deep within its systems, old defense protocols that had been dormant for generations quietly began to stir, preparing themselves for a future none of them could yet see clearly. Paperwork could move slowly when it wanted to, and painfully fast when someone with enough money wanted it to. Director Voss had learned that lesson early in his career, and he used it now without hesitation. Within days of learning what Providence truly was, his office had filed a correction notice, claiming the auction sale had been an administrative error that needed to be reversed. The notice arrived at the scrapyard on a quiet afternoon, delivered by a small drone that landed neatly at the base of the boarding ramp. Daniel picked it up, opened the message, and read it twice before handing it to Grace, who had been staying nearby ever since her first visit, helping them prepare for exactly this kind of trouble. They're saying the sale was a mistake, Daniel said, and that I have 3 days to hand the ship over voluntarily before they send a recovery crew. Grace scanned the notice quickly, her expression hardening. This isn't a mistake, Daniel. This is a company realizing it lost something valuable and trying to take it back the easy way first. And if the easy way doesn't work, then they'll try the harder way. Owen, who had been running cable through an open panel nearby, dropped his tools with a loud clatter. So we're really doing this. We're keeping a warship a corporation wants back. I bought it fair, Daniel said. 20 credits, no tricks. If they want it back, they can explain to a judge why they mislabeled it in the first place. That's a nice idea, Grace said. But companies like Voss's don't usually wait for judges when they think they can just take what they want first and argue about it later. Iris's voice joined the conversation, calm as always. She is correct. I have analyzed the notice's language. It gives you legal cover for a forced boarding, framed as a routine correction rather than a seizure. If they act quickly, they may not even need a judge involved at all. Daniel looked at the notice again, then out through the open ramp at the quiet scrapyard beyond, the same place where all of this had started with a laugh from a crowd who thought he had wasted his money. Then we make sure we're ready before they show up, he said. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. Owen focused on the ship's damaged systems, patching what he could and rerouting power where entire sections had gone dark for years. Grace, drawing on her old training, walked Daniel through basic ship operations, teaching him how to read the strange old displays and understand what Iris was showing him at any given moment. Iris itself worked quietly in the background, running diagnostics on systems that had been asleep far longer than any of them realized, slowly bringing pieces of the old warship back to life one section at a time. On the morning the deadline expired, 3 armored transports rolled up to the scrapyard gates. Men in gray uniforms marched out, carrying tools meant for forced boarding rather than negotiation. Daniel watched them approach from the ship's ramp, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Iris," he said quietly, "can you seal the ramp?" "I can," Iris replied. "But sealing it will only delay them, not stop them. They have cutting equipment." "Then let's give them something more interesting to deal with than a locked door." The recovery crew reached the base of the ramp, and one of them stepped forward, holding up a copy of the correction notice like it was a key that would open any door. "By order of the Salvage Authority," he announced, "this vessel is to be returned to proper registry. Stand aside." "I bought this ship," Daniel called down. "Fair and legal. If your director has a problem with that, he can bring it up through the courts." "We're not here to argue paperwork," the man said. "We're here to take the ship." He signaled to the others, who began moving equipment toward the ramp. That was when the ship, still and silent until that exact moment, responded on its own. A low hum spread through the hull, and thin panels along the ship's sides folded open, revealing systems no one in the recovery crew had expected to see active. Small defense turrets, old but functional, rotated smoothly and aimed just above the heads of the crew, close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to avoid causing harm. The recovery crew froze in place. "This vessel," Iris announced, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "is registered under lawful private ownership. Further attempts at forced boarding will be treated as hostile action." The lead officer's face went pale. He had come expecting an easy job, a quick seizure of a supposedly harmless old hull. He had not expected the hull to speak back, let alone aim weapons at him that were somehow still working after decades of neglect. "This is a mistake," he said, backing away slowly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Daniel called down. "You tried to take something that wasn't yours. Go tell your director that." The crew retreated without another word, climbing back into their transports and driving off in a hurry, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks and a stunned silence over the scrapyard. Owen let out a long breath and sat down heavily on a nearby crate. "We just scared off an entire recovery crew," he said, half laughing, half in disbelief. "For now," Grace said, watching the transports disappear down the road. "But Voss isn't the kind of man who gives up after one failure. And worse, if word about this ship's weapons reaches the wrong ears, Voss will be the least of your problems." Daniel looked up at Providence towering above him, its old defense systems slowly folding back into place, quiet once again, but no longer forgotten. "Then we'd better find out exactly what this ship is capable of," he said, "before someone worse comes looking for it." Far above the scrapyard, unseen by any of them, a single unmarked scout vessel passed silently through the upper atmosphere, its sensors quietly recording everything that had just happened before turning and disappearing back into the dark of space. Stars did not care about anyone's plans, and they hung silent and unmoved over the scrapyard the night everything changed. Daniel had gotten used to sleeping aboard Providence by then, spending his nights in a small crew cabin near the command deck instead of his old apartment across the city. It was Grace who noticed the problem first, sitting up late reviewing sensor logs that Iris had slowly restored over the past week. "Daniel," she called out, her voice sharp enough to pull him from sleep instantly. "You need to see this." He found her in the command deck, staring at a display showing a cluster of unfamiliar shapes approaching from the edge of the system. Owen arrived moments later, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep until he saw the same display and went fully still. "Iris," Daniel said, "what are we looking at?" 7 vessels, Iris answered. "Configuration matches a fleet I have not seen active in generations. Their approach pattern suggests they are not here for trade." "Who are they?" Owen asked. "The same faction Providence fought against during the war that made this ship famous," Iris said. "Their commander's ident signature is old, but I recognize the family line. Admiral Draven. His ancestors lost that war. It appears he has not forgotten." Grace's expression darkened. "The scout ship that flew over during the recovery attempt. It must have reported what it saw." Daniel felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "How long until they arrive?" "At current speed, less than 2 hours," Iris said. 2 hours. Daniel looked around the command deck, at Owen's exhausted face, at Grace already moving toward the weapons controls, at the quiet hum of a ship that had only just begun waking up after decades of sleep. 2 hours was nowhere near enough time to become the crew this ship truly needed. "Can we run?" Owen asked. "This ship's engines are still not fully restored," Iris said. "Attempting a jump in this condition carries significant risk of failure. So we can't run, and we're not ready to fight," Owen said. "Great." Daniel took a slow breath, forcing his mind to focus instead of panic. "Then we don't fight the way they expect." "Iris, what do we actually have working right now?" "Point defense turrets, shield generators at reduced capacity, and enough main power for one focused cannon strike," Iris said. "Everything else remains offline." "One shot," Grace said, "against 7 ships." "One very good shot," Daniel said, an idea beginning to form. "Iris, this ship was built during a war against exactly this kind of fleet. There has to be something in your old records. A tactic. Anything they wouldn't expect from a ship this size." Iris was quiet for a moment, searching. "There is one maneuver log during the final battle of the war. Considered reckless even then. It uses the ship's mass and remaining shield power to draw enemy fire toward a single point, while redirecting full power briefly into the main cannon for one devastating strike." "Reckless? How reckless?" Owen asked. "The commander who used it," Iris said, "did not survive the encounter unharmed. But the enemy flagship at the time was destroyed, ending the battle in humanity's favor." Daniel looked at the old chair at the center of the command deck, the same one his ancestor had once sat in facing impossible odds. "Then we use it." By the time the enemy fleet arrived, word had already spread through the scrapyard and beyond. Independent traders who had heard about the failed recovery attempt, curious about the ship that had stood up to a corporation without firing a shot, arrived in small numbers, offering whatever help they could. It was not an army. It was a handful of scrappy, mismatched ships, but it was more than Daniel had expected, and far more than Draven's fleet seemed to expect as well. The enemy ships spread out in a wide formation as they entered range, clearly intending to surround Providence and end the fight quickly. Daniel sat in the old command chair, hands steady on the controls Grace had spent the last week teaching him to use. "They're moving to surround us," Grace said. "Let them," Daniel replied. "Iris, redirect shields exactly like the old logs. Draw their fire toward the center." The shields flared bright as enemy weapons opened fire, concentrating everything on Providence exactly as the old tactic predicted. The scrappy trader ships used the opening to strike at the fleet's flanks, forcing Draven's forces to split their attention just as Daniel's improvised allies had hoped. "Power redirected," Iris said. "Main cannon ready. This will only work once." Daniel watched the enemy flagship on the display, moving confidently toward the center of the fight, certain of victory. He thought, briefly, of the man in the old footage who had once sat in this exact chair facing an enemy just like this one. "Fire," Daniel said. The old cannon, silent for generations, roared back to life in a single blinding strike that tore straight through the heart of the enemy flagship. The explosion lit up the darkness of space, and for a long moment, everything on the display went still. Draven's remaining ships broke formation immediately, retreating in disorder without their flagship to command them. The independent traders cheered over the open comm channels, their scattered ships regrouping near Providence as the enemy fleet disappeared back into the dark edges of the system. Owen let out a shaky laugh, gripping the edge of his console. "We actually did it." Grace allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Your ancestor would be proud." Daniel sat back in the command chair, his hands finally steady, staring at the empty space where the enemy fleet had been only minutes before. 20 credits. It still did not feel real, even now, that everything happening around him had started with 20 credits and a laughing crowd. "Iris," he said quietly, "is it over?" "For today," Iris answered. But Daniel Ortiz, ships like this one rarely stay quiet for long once the galaxy remembers they exist. News traveled fast after the battle, faster than Daniel expected, and by the time he stepped off the ship the next morning, reporters had already gathered outside the scrapyard gates. Somebody had recorded the fight from a distance, grainy footage of an old warship standing against 7 enemy ships, and within a day the story had spread across every corner of the settled systems. Director Voss watched the news from his office, his earlier plans for a quiet reclamation now completely useless. There was no way to seize a ship quietly when half the galaxy already knew its name and had watched it win a battle against impossible odds. His legal team advised him, in careful and apologetic language, to drop the matter entirely before it became an even bigger embarrassment. Voss agreed, though not gracefully, and the correction notice was quietly withdrawn a few days later without any public announcement. Back at the scrapyard, Daniel stood at the base of the ramp, looking up at Providence in the early morning light. The ship looked different to him now, though nothing about its hull had physically changed. He simply saw it differently, the way a person looks at an old photograph once they finally learn the story behind it. "You've been quiet all morning," Grace said, walking up beside him with 2 cups of something warm from a nearby stall. "Just thinking," Daniel said, accepting one of the cups. "A week ago I was broke, looking for spare parts to resell. Now I own a warship, made an enemy out of a corporate director, and apparently fought off a fleet that's been holding a grudge for generations." "Busy week," Grace said, a faint smile on her face. Owen joined them a moment later, looking exhausted but satisfied, a smudge of grease still on his cheek from the repairs he had spent half the night finishing. "The engines are finally stable. Iris says we could actually leave orbit now if we wanted to." "Iris says a lot of things," Daniel replied, though there was warmth in his voice rather than doubt. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Iris's voice came softly through a nearby speaker mounted near the ramp. "I do try to be helpful." Daniel climbed the ramp slowly, running his hand along the hull the same way he had the very first day, when the ship had still been nothing more than a strange, dead hulk he had bought on a whim. Inside, the corridors were brighter now, no longer coated in years of dust, the lights steady instead of flickering. He made his way to the archive room, the same quiet space where he had first learned the truth about his ancestor. Iris had promised him, after the battle, that there was more still hidden in the ship's oldest records, things even the AI itself had never fully reviewed. "You said there was more," Daniel said, sitting down in the familiar chair. "There is," Iris said, "though I suspect some answers will always stay just out of reach. I still do not know what became of your ancestor after his final order to me. I have searched every record I hold, and the trail simply ends." "Maybe that's all right," Daniel said, after a moment of thought. "Maybe not every story needs a perfect ending. He gave you an order, and you followed it for generations. That's not nothing." "No," Iris agreed quietly. "It is not nothing." Daniel looked around the archive room, at the shelves of buried history, at the chair where he now sat that had once belonged to a man he had never met but somehow still carried a part of. He thought about the scrapyard, the laughing crowd, the 20 credits that had started all of this. "So what happens now?" he asked. "This ship is mine, legally, no arguments left. I could sell pieces of it, retire somewhere quiet, forget any of this ever happened." "You could," Iris said. "But I do not believe that is who you are, Daniel Ortiz." Daniel smiled slightly, standing up from the chair. "No, I don't think it is either." He made his way back through the ship, past Owen running final diagnostics on the engines, past Grace studying old star charts with the focus of someone already planning their first real journey. Providence hummed quietly around them, fully awake now after years of silent waiting, ready for whatever came next. Standing at the top of the ramp, Daniel looked out over the scrapyard one last time, the same place where this entire story had begun. Somewhere out past the fences, the city continued on exactly as it always had, unaware that the cheapest purchase ever made at that auction had turned into something far bigger than anyone could have guessed. "Iris," Daniel said, "set a course. Anywhere. Let's see what this old ship can really do." "As you wish, Captain," Iris replied, and for the first time, the title did not feel strange at all. The ramp closed slowly behind him, sealing the ship for departure. Engines that had been silent for generations came to life fully for the first time in decades, a low, steady roar building beneath the hull. Providence lifted off from the scrapyard where it had sat forgotten for so long, rising into the morning sky and leaving the dust and rust of its old life behind. Far below, the scrapyard grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared completely from view. Ahead lay open space, full of unknown paths and unfinished stories. And for the first time in a very long time, Providence was no longer waiting. It was moving forward, carrying its captain toward whatever came next, with Iris quietly watching over him just as she always had and always would.